The Vox hail of Ironheart Vengeance, a hulking Mechanicus ore freighter, was a dull hum against the void black canvas of the Xylos Delta system. It was a monotonous, predictable sound, much like the world it approached. Xylos Delta was a monument to unthinking efficiency, a vast, geologically unstable sphere dedicated entirely to the extraction of rare earth elements crucial for the Imperium's war machine. Its surface, viewed from orbit, was a mosaic of gargantuan automated strip mines, self-replicating drilling rigs, and colossal ore processing plants, all linked by a latticework of magnetic levitation conduits that hummed with kinetic energy. There were no cities, no verdant fields, no native life. There was only industry, ceaseless and cold. The Mechanicus personnel who maintained this colossal factory world were few, a mere fraction of the standard imperial planetary population, for their numbers were augmented and dwarfed by the untold millions of servitors that constituted Xylos Delta's workforce. These biomechanical drones, once human, now mere automatons of flesh and steel, moved with programmed precision across the planet's scarred surface and through its subterranean arteries. They dug, they refined, they transported. Their minds were blank slates, wiped clean of individuality, imprinted with the rote commands of the machine god. They were the perfect laborers, tireless, unquestioning, and utterly devoid of self-preservation or rebellion. Or so the Adeptus Mechanicus believed. Magos Phaeron, a cybernetically enhanced engine seer whose organic brain was but a gray husk within a gleaming adamantium skull casing, had overseen Xylos Delta for 3 Terran decades. He loved its immaculate logic, its lack of biological complication. To him, it was a symphony of gears and data streams, a testament to the Omnissiah's perfection. The few hundred ratings, junior tech priests, and logistical clerks, the wetware of the world, were a necessary evil, confined to the deepest, most secure levels of the primary cathedral forge, a titanic structure that plunged miles into the planet's core, its upper spire piercing the perpetual industrial haze. Their interactions were minimal, their purpose strictly defined, their biological presence tolerated only where automation proved too complex or too vulnerable to psychic interference. They were a control group, a necessary biological component in an otherwise magnificent machine. The Ironheart Vengeance docked with the primary orbital transfer station, a Goliath of durasteel and plasma conduits. Its cargo holds were pregnant with processed manganese destined for a forge world several sectors away. As the enormous docking clamps sealed and the pressurized gangways extended, the first of the unloading servitors, heavily armored with multi-jointed manipulators, trundled forward. They were directed by a handful of human ratings, their faces pale and drawn from weeks in the void, their uniforms stained with the grime of interstellar travel. Among them, unnoticed, unseen, were the stowaways. Hidden within a void-sealed cargo container, amidst a shipment of replacement cogitator cores, a brood of genestealers stirred. They had boarded the Vengeance during a chaotic layover at a distressed Imperial agri-world, their arrival a subtle corruption amongst the panicked refugees. Now, they were here, on Xylos Delta, a world ripe for their insidious brand of conquest. The Patriarch, a hulking, four-armed nightmare, its chitin carapace the color of bruised amethyst, stretched its barbed talons, its multifaceted eyes scanning the psychic landscape of this new, sterile world. It tasted the faint, flickering embers of human minds, the ratings, the few tech priests, a feast, albeit a small one. But beneath that, a vast, silent ocean of blankness, an emptiness that stretched farther than any genestealer had ever encountered. The servitors. The initial infections were easy, almost laughably so. The dockside ratings, weary and unobservant, fell prey to the scuttling horrors emerging from the cargo hold. A flash of chitin, a silent embrace in a shadowed alcove, the distinctive psychic kiss, and their minds were altered, their loyalties rewritten. Within hours, these newly inducted cultists were back at their posts, their eyes holding a new, unsettling depth, their actions imbued with an alien purpose. They were the seeds planted in the barren soil of Xylos Delta. But the servitors, they presented a unique challenge, a true genestealer kiss, which rewrites the genetic code and neural pathways of a living organism, was designed for a sentient mind, a fertile biological host. Servitors, however, were anathema to such a process. Their brains were surgically altered, vast swaths removed, others augmented with direct cortical implants. Their consciousness was not merely suppressed, it was mostly gone, replaced by hardwired directives and rudimentary cogitator functions. They were biological machines, their minds a cacophony of simple looping commands: lift, carry, weld, cut, move, process. The Patriarch, ensconced in a newly hollowed-out chamber, deep within the orbital transfer station. Its spawn slowly but surely infiltrating the lower levels of the planet-side cathedral forge, found itself confronting an unprecedented hurdle. Its psychic prowess, usually a scalpel precise enough to twist even a battle-hardened Space Marine's will, found no purchase in the vast majority of these automatons. It was like trying to sculpt a statue out of mist. Yet, the hive mind was nothing if not adaptive. The Genestealer Patriarch was a living conduit, an advanced scout for a cosmic horror that consumed and adapted. It stretched its consciousness, probing the servitor networks. It wasn't about genetic infection here. It was about control. The servitors, while lobotomized, still possessed rudimentary biological components, nerve endings, residual bioelectrical impulses. More importantly, they were connected. A vast, intricate data net linked every servitor unit, every automated system, every piece of machinery on Xylos Delta. It was the planet's nervous system, its mind. The Patriarch shifted its strategy. Instead of a direct psychic assault on individual, inert minds, it began to whisper into the network itself. It didn't try to awaken consciousness. It sought to reprogram. Its psychic presence, a dissonant hum against the planet's rhythmic thrum, began to subtly corrupt the data streams. A servitor unit's primary directive to transport ore might gain a new subconscious subroutine. Transport ore to designated facility, then proceed to sub-level Gamma-9 for reprocessing. This reprocessing would, in fact, be a retasking by the cult, or a slow, unthinking march into a hidden lair for permanent repurposing. The first conversions were simple. A mining servitor, designated Unit 734 Alpha, instead of returning to its recharge station, took a detour. It moved with the same lumbering, unthinking gait, its hydraulic limbs clanking, its optical sensors gleaming dull red. But its path was altered, subtly, imperceptibly, by a psychic suggestion from the Patriarch. It moved towards a seldom-used ventilation shaft, a dark maw leading to unexplored depths. There, it would begin to carve out a new path, a secret route for the cult's expansion, its drills turning stone into powder, not for the Omnissiah, but for the star gods. These initial deviations were tiny, statistical anomalies, lost in the oceanic scale of Xylos Delta's operations. A data entry might show a mining servitor operating beyond its designated zone for a few minutes. A maintenance cogitator might register a minor power fluctuation in a section of the network that quickly resolved itself. These were errors, nothing more, easily explained away by the vast complexity of the system. The few organic minds on Xylos Delta were accustomed to the occasional system glitch. The machine was, after all, a creation of man, imperfect by its very nature. But each glitch was a tendril, reaching deeper, spreading wider. Each rerouted servitor was a new, tireless drone at the cult's disposal. The planet, once a symphony of logical, predictable industry, was beginning to sing a new, unsettling tune. A silent, insidious takeover had begun, not of minds or souls, but of protocols and circuits, guided by the alien will of a creature that understood instinctively how to turn the Imperium's tools against itself. The future of Xylos Delta and its unwitting human masters was being meticulously, silently rewritten. The Ironheart vengeance had been purged of its crew, its organic components either culled for future broods or turned to the nascent cult's will, their minds now echoing with the hymnals of the star gods. But the initial harvest was meager. Xylos Delta was, by design, a barren rock for the flesh, its human population a thin veneer over an oceanic void of servitors. The patriarch, a creature of instinct and alien cunning, understood that its traditional methods, while effective, would be far too slow to gain dominance here. Its brood, secreted away in the cavernous, forgotten spaces of the orbital station, began to multiply in the darkness, but their numbers were insignificant against the mechanized might of the world. Magos Phaeron, locked in his sanctum deep within the cathedral forge, was absorbed in the intricate dances of data, utterly oblivious to the silent, creeping horror unfolding above and around him. His faith in the machine was absolute, his trust in its logic unwavering. The occasional maintenance reports detailing minor power fluctuations or brief, localized network desynchronizations were duly noted, logged, and dismissed as statistical noise. The machine, after all, was complex, and perfection was an ideal, not a constant. Meanwhile, on the orbital station and in the upper levels of the cathedral forge, the human overseers and ratings who had survived the initial genestealer predation were undergoing a far more insidious transformation. Take tech acolyte Jinnah, a pale, earnest youth charged with monitoring the planet's atmospheric processors. She had encountered a newly inducted cultist, a dock hand she'd known for cycles, whose eyes held an unsettling gleam. He spoke in low, soothing tones, words of unity and a glorious future. A future beyond the drudgery of gears and data. Jinnah, isolated and starved for genuine human contact, found herself drawn to his fervent pronouncements. The kiss, when it came in the dim, stale air of a rerouting conduit, was quick, almost gentle, and imbued with a terrifying sense of belonging, an intoxicating relief from the crushing loneliness. Her programming remained: monitor processors, log data, maintain atmospheric stability. But now, overlaid upon her duties, was an unshakable loyalty to her new family, a dedication to the silent master whose alien thoughts now sang in her mind. But these few, even when fully subverted, were too few to seize Xylos Delta. The true challenge lay in the servitors. The Patriarch, having secured its initial foothold, descended deeper into the orbital station, its progeny scuttling through maintenance shafts and forgotten utility conduits, slowly extending the network of tunnels and hideaways. From its newly established lair, deep within a disused plasma conduit manifold, it began its truly audacious campaign. Its psychic proboscis, normally so adept at piercing the fragile veil of consciousness, found only a void when it touched the servitor minds. It was like shouting into a chasm. A standard mining servitor, Unit 88 Gamma, lumbered past the Patriarch's hidden vantage point, its optical sensors glowing dull red, its massive shovel arm swinging with predictable rhythm as it cleared loose aggregate. The Patriarch extended its will, a tendril of raw, alien thought. It attempted to implant the compulsion to deviate, to seek out a hidden passage, to alter its route. But there was no ego, no fear, no desire to exploit. The servitor's mind was a hard-wired loop. Detect material, scoop material, convey material, repeat. The psychic command simply bounced off this impenetrable, unthinking wall of rote function. The servitor continued its task, unperturbed, a monument to the Mechanicus's brutal efficiency. A fleeting ripple of alien frustration passed through the Patriarch's vast consciousness. This was unprecedented. No sentient species had ever presented such a passive, yet utterly unyielding, mental barrier. Yet, the hive mind, of which the Patriarch was but a remote, localized shard, was the ultimate adapter. It did not think in terms of failure, only in terms of iterative modification. The servitors were not minds, in the human sense, but they were machines. They ran on protocols, on data streams, on bioelectrical impulses that mimicked logic gates. And these systems, these networks, were tangible things, electrical pathways, not ephemeral souls. The Patriarch shifted its approach. If it could not corrupt the soul, it would corrupt the code. It began with the network itself. Xylos. Delta was a sprawling, interconnected web. Every servitor, every automated drill, every ore sorter, every life support system, even the humblest environment sensor, communicated across a vast, interwoven data lattice. The Patriarch extended its psychic presence not as a direct assault on a single mind, but as a broad-spectrum emission, a subtle, resonant frequency that vibrated against the planet's pervasive cogitator, hum. It was a parasitic signal, an injection into the digital bloodstream of Xylos Delta. Consider Unit 404 Omega, a data conduit servitor. It was little more than a lobotomized skull encased in a spider-like chassis. Its remaining neural tissue interfaced directly with the primary data trunks of Sector 7. Its sole function was to act as a repeater, amplifying and routing information packets across its designated quadrant. It was a digital bottleneck, a critical node. The Patriarch focused its will upon this unit, not to infect its non-existent mind, but to overwrite its core functions. Slowly, imperceptibly, a new subroutine was grafted onto Unit 404 Omega's primary directives. Its optical sensors, which normally scanned for network integrity, now began to subtly prioritize certain data packets, those emanating from hidden cultist comm beads, those containing information on Mechanicus patrol routes, those detailing resource flows to sectors earmarked for future cult activity. It wasn't choosing to do this. Its internal programming, its very logic, had been psychically rewritten. It believed it was executing its primary function with peak efficiency, routing relevant data. But the definition of relevant had been subtly skewed. This was the crucible. This was the moment the Genestealer cult on Xylos Delta evolved beyond simple biological infestation. It became a digital plague. Once a few key data conduit servitors, like Unit 404 Omega, were corrupted, they acted as relay points, silently broadcasting the Patriarch's new protocols across the network. It was like a meticulously crafted virus, spreading through the logic gates, embedding itself deep within the operating systems of millions of servitor units. A standard maintenance servitor, designated Unit 117 Theta, was programmed to patrol and repair designated sections of the sub-level utility conduits. After its local network node was psychically infected, its primary patrol route subroutine gained a new chillant addendum. After completing repair protocols, proceed to designated rendezvous point in abandoned utility shaft C-27 and await further instruction. The servitor would complete its repairs with perfect, unthinking diligence. Then, without a flicker of deviation visible to any external sensor, it would turn and lumber towards its new, hidden purpose. These further instructions often involved repurposing its tools, its welding torch now used to cut new passages, its manipulator claws used to excavate, its internal power cells redirected to power newly installed cultist equipment. The servitors were not aware of their betrayal. They simply were. They saw no conflict in their new directives, for they lacked the capacity for self-reflection. They believed they were fulfilling their sacred duties to the Omnissiah, even as they carved out subterranean catacombs for the star gods. The scale of this silent subversion was terrifying. Millions of servitors, from the humblest ore grinder to the most complex environmental regulator, slowly had their core programming overwritten. Their internal monitors would show no error. Their optical sensors would betray no hint of malice. They continued to function with the chilling, unthinking precision that was their hallmark. But their purpose had been redefined. Their loyalty, once pledged to the machine god, was now, without their comprehension, devoted to the alien entity that nested in the dark, weaving its invisible web through the very essence of Xylos Delta. The very tools of the Imperium were being turned against it, not in a bloody rebellion of conscious slaves, but in a silent, utterly cold betrayal of programmed automatons. The whispers in the cogitators were growing louder, an unheard anthem of alien dominion. Xylos. Delta continued its ceaseless, grinding industry. From orbit, it remained a vision of mechanistic perfection, a world factory performing its sacred duty to the Imperium. Miles beneath its scarred, engineered surface, however, a new architect was at work, an unseen intelligence orchestrating a silent revolution. The Genestealer Patriarch, having perfected its method of psychic digital subversion, now commanded a vast, unthinking legion. No longer merely infecting, but reprogramming. The alien entity had turned the very sinews and bones of the Mechanicus world against itself. The human-descended cultists, those few who had succumbed to the Patriarch's original kiss, served as the primary nexus for higher-level strategic planning, their minds resonating with the star god's will. Yet, their numbers remained insignificant compared to the millions of servitors. Their true genius lay in their ability to interpret the Patriarch's broad psychic directives into specific, actionable protocols for the vast servitor network. They were the silent scribes of the alien will, inputting nuanced commands into the subverted data streams, guiding the mechanized workforce with chilling precision. Deep beneath the primary cathedral forge, in sectors designated decommissioned or experimental waste, a massive construction project was underway. It was a project that would have brought the wrath of the Omnissiah down upon any organic orchestrator, yet it proceeded with the cold, unthinking efficiency of the machine itself. Heavy mining servitors, their multi-spectrum optics, usually tuned for geological analysis, now focused their powerful survey arrays on locating areas of structural weakness, forgotten access tunnels, or geological voids. Their plasma drills, designed to bore through adamantium-reinforced rock for resource extraction, now carved out vast, echoing caverns and intricate networks of passages, all without human oversight. Consider Unit 505 Kappa, a repurposed tunnel bore servitor. Its programming once dictated the precise expansion of sanctioned mining shafts, following pre-approved geological schematics. Now, its internal cogitators, subtly corrupted, prioritized a new set of coordinates drawn from the Patriarch's psychic emissions, interpreted by a human cultist, and transmitted through a subverted data node. Its laser guidance systems, still operating with perfect accuracy, directed its colossal helical drill head not towards a new vein of rhodium, but into the unmapped bedrock, charting a course towards a primordial fissure deep within the planet's mantle. The rock and slag it excavated were automatically processed by accompanying ore hauler servitors, not for refining and imperial shipment, but for silent dumping into forgotten seismic vents, or for use as structural infill in cult-specific constructions. No alarm bells rang, for the servitor was merely excavating, transporting, and processing, all within its core parameters. Its loyalty to the Omnissiah remained unquestioned by its own inert mind. Only its purpose had changed. Resource rerouting became a chillingly elegant ballet of mechanical betrayal. Ore conveyors, designed to transport refined materials to orbital platforms, would now divert a small, almost imperceptible percentage of specific resources, specialized alloys, rare gases, even advanced power cells, into hidden storage caches accessible only through the burgeoning cult network. Production servitors in automated fabrication facilities, their programs overwritten, would dedicate brief, unscheduled shifts to producing components entirely unknown to the Mechanicus inventory. Grotesque biotanks for accelerated spawn growth, crude but effective psychic dampening fields, or even refashioned weapons from mining tools. A welder servitor, Unit 919 Eta, might spend its sanctioned cycle sealing a bulkhead in Sector 4. Then, once its shift was officially logged as complete, it would silently trundle to a newly opened access tunnel and begin welding together the adamantium plates of a new, reinforced cult sanctum. The scale was truly terrifying. Instead of a handful of zealous cultists scrambling to build a hidden lair with scavenged tools, the Xylos Delta Genestealer cult commanded a planetary-scale workforce of millions of tireless, unthinking drones. Every whir of a power drill, every clang of a hydraulic press, every hum of an energy conduit was now potentially serving the star gods. The planet, a marvel of imperial engineering, was slowly but surely becoming an exquisitely calibrated trap, a complex, self-building engine of tyrannid conquest. Deep within the planet's abyssal depths, where the heat from the core bled into the bedrock and only automated probes dared venture, vast, cavernous spaces were being prepared. These were the true nurseries, the immense gestation chambers for the tyrannid vanguard fleet that the Patriarch's arrival presaged. Here, specialist construction servitors, some of them ancient models deemed too unstable for frontline Imperial work, were retasked. They built intricate biocontainment vessels from refined alloys, laid handles of biological nutrient conduits, and even sculpted vast organic mimicking structures from raw geological materials, all under the psychic direction of the Patriarch. The hum of their repurposed generators filled the air, a deep, resonant thrumming that echoed off the newly carved walls, a mechanical dirge for the imminent doom of Xylos Delta. Magos Pharaon, ensconced in his central data core, remained largely oblivious. His monitors, usually a pristine display of green and amber data streams, occasionally flickered with an aberrant red spike. A minor power surge in Sector 7, quickly resolved, or an unscheduled reroute of processed ore batch Alpha 7, attributed to system optimization. These were aberrations, certainly, but in a system of Xylos Delta's complexity and sheer scale, they were statistical background noise. He dismissed them as transient micro-fractures in the grand machine's logic, easily smoothed over by the auto-corrective protocols. The idea of an external, organic, and psychic entity subverting his perfect, logical domain was anathema, a heresy against the Omnissiah itself. To even conceive of such a thing was to admit an imperfection in the machine, God's designs, a flaw in the very essence of technological purity. And so, the work continued, silent and unseen. Millions of servitors, with blank, unseeing optical sensors, moved with the same tireless purpose they always had. But where before they had served the Imperium, now they served the creeping hunger of the great devourer. The chilling efficiency of their movements, devoid of emotion, fear, or self-preservation, made them the perfect, terrifying architects of their own world's doom. Xylos Delta was not merely infested. It was being meticulously, painstakingly rebuilt from the inside out, transmuted from a bastion of imperial industry into a nascent tyrannid staging ground, its doom heralded by the silent clang of tools and the whisper of rewritten code. The grand machine that was Xylos Delta continued its rhythmic operations, its internal systems humming a false tune of health and efficiency. To the casual, even the meticulous observer, the world appeared unchanged. Ore flowed, machinery whirred, and the planetary output metrics remained consistent, even slightly improved in some minor sectors due to the cult's unconscious reprioritization of certain processes. Yet, beneath this veneer of operational excellence, a cancerous shadow was spreading, manifesting as glitches in the grand machine. The first noticeable anomalies were subtle, easily dismissed as the inevitable friction of a system running at peak capacity for centuries. Junior tech priests on rotation within the cathedral forge's labyrinthine monitoring decks began to log an increasing number of minor, transient errors. An ore shipment from Sector 12, designated for direct transport to an orbital depot, might instead experience a brief, unexplained reroute through a sub-level processing facility in Sector 3, adding several hours to its transit time before ultimately reaching its correct destination. The data logs would show optimized route protocol engaged, or system efficiency adjustment, but the underlying algorithms for these optimizations were untraceable, like phantom data. Magos Phaeron, with his unwavering faith in the logic of the machine, attributed these occurrences to unforeseen computational redundancies, or the auto-corrective protocols self-optimizing in unexpected ways. His pronouncements, broadcast across the few communal Vox channels, were always reassuring. The Omnissiah's grand design is ever unfolding. Minor data stream fluctuations are but the eddies in the mighty river of progress. His subordinates, trained in unquestioning obedience, accepted his explanations, even as a faint unease began to prickle at the edges of their augmented minds. The scale of the malfunctions slowly escalated. Environmental regulators in abandoned sublevels, previously dormant, would suddenly register an inexplicable surge in atmospheric pressure or humidity before returning to baseline. The maintenance servitors dispatched to investigate would report no anomalies found, their internal sensors detecting nothing amiss, despite the data log. What the servitors couldn't report was that the brief environmental fluctuations coincided precisely with the activation of a newly established cult hatchery, its biotanks requiring specific atmospheric conditions for optimal growth, conditions that were then quickly normalized to avoid detection. The servitors were, in effect, reporting no error because their subverted programming defined these transient changes as part of an unrecognized yet legitimate operational cycle. More concerning were the minor data discrepancies that began to accumulate. A specific batch of volatile chemical catalysts logged for transport to a reactor cooling manifold might be recorded as having arrived at its destination, only for a manual inventory check by a human rating, a rare occurrence on Xylos Delta, to reveal a shortfall of 3.7%. The discrepancy would be attributed to evaporation during transit, or calibration error in volumetric sensor array. The missing catalysts, in reality, were being siphoned off by repurposed chemical transport servitors, their tanks subtly refilled with inert waste products to be used in the accelerated bioprocesses of the genestealer broods. The most unnerving glitches involved the servitors themselves. A production line servitor, Unit 202 Psi, tasked with assembling power regulators, might, for a fleeting moment, cease its repetitive movements, its optical sensors dimming to black before flaring back to life, and resuming its task as if nothing had happened. A human tech priest, acolyte Jaina, before her eventual subversion, had witnessed such an event. She had noted the servitor's internal diagnostics momentarily flatline, then mysteriously reinitialize with no logged error. When questioned by a superior, she received a stern rebuke. Do not allow organic superstition to cloud your mechanical judgment, acolyte. Servitor units undergo spontaneous recalibration. It is within expected parameters. What Jaina didn't know, and what the automated systems couldn't report, was that these momentary pauses were the servitor's mind, or what remained of it, momentarily struggling against the psychic reprogramming. A faint, almost infinitesimal echo of its original purpose, its pre-corruption protocols, flickering to life before being decisively overwritten by the patriarch's relentless, alien will. It was the internal struggle of a machine being coerced, a ghost in the shell, fighting against its own new directives. These instances of internal strife were swiftly and brutally suppressed by the patriarch's overarching psychic control, resulting in the spontaneous recalibration that Jaina observed. The collective effect of these minor, escalating malfunctions was a growing sense of unease among the limited organic staff. Whispers began to circulate in the few authorized brake chambers. Stories of servitors taking unusual routes, of data logs that didn't quite add up, of strange, low thrumming sounds emanating from decommissioned sectors deep below. These were dismissed as paranoia, as the natural anxieties of organic minds confronted with the perfect logic of the machine. Yet even Magos Pharaon, in his adamantium sanctum, began to experience a faint, almost subliminal disquiet. The sheer volume of these minor anomalies was slowly surpassing acceptable statistical thresholds. His internal chronometer, which tracked the planet's overall operational efficiency, showed a minuscule but persistent deviation from theoretical optimum. It was not a catastrophic failure, not even a significant drop, but a drift, like a gyroscope slowly losing its perfect balance. He would spend hours poring over reams of data, running predictive algorithms, simulating system interactions. He found nothing definitive. Every anomaly, when isolated, could be logically explained, albeit sometimes with convoluted reasoning. Yet, the pattern of anomalies, the way they seemed to cluster and resonate across disparate systems, began to gnaw at the edges of his cybernetic logic. The Omnissiah's grand machine was not supposed to drift. It was supposed to be perfect. The insidious nature of the genestealer subversion lay in its exploitation of this very faith. The Mechanicus trusted its machines implicitly. Any malfunction was attributed to internal factors: wear, tear, software bugs, design flaws, never to an external, unseen, and utterly alien intelligence twisting the very gears of their faith. The glitches were not errors. They were symptoms of a world being slowly, inexorably retasked. The shadow had indeed fallen, and the true horror was that the Mechanicus couldn't even perceive its shape, blinded by their own unwavering, dogmatic belief in the purity of the machine. Magos, Pharaon, High Enginseer of Xylos. Delta was a being forged in the fires of absolute, logical purity and unyielding faith in the Omnissiah. His organic components were mere vestiges, almost entirely replaced by gleaming chrome and humming servos. His optic sensors, integrated into his adamantium skull casing, saw only data, processed through layers of cold, calculating logic. Emotion, superstition, and intuition were weaknesses, purged from his neural pathways decades ago. He was, in his own estimation, as close to the machine as a living being could become, and thus inherently incorruptible. The escalating glitches that had begun to plague Xylos Delta, however, were beginning to test the limits of his perfectly engineered composure. He had dismissed them initially, then rationalized them, but the sheer statistical volume of unexplained phenomena could no longer be ignored. Data ghosts flickered across his internal displays. Servitors reported in two places at once, power conduits fluctuating with a chaotic rhythm. Ore yields in certain sectors showing inexplicable depletion, while others displayed equally inexplicable surpluses. The grand machine, his magnum opus, was beginning to sing a dissonant chord. Farron initiated what he termed anathema program, Xylos Delta, Protocol Omega. This was an unprecedented planet-wide diagnostic designed to probe every circuit, every data stream, every cogitator loop of Xylos Delta. For weeks, his central sanctum, the core cognitorium, glowed with an eerie green light as millions of petabytes of data flowed into his auger arrays. He would go for days without even the minimal recharges his few biological components required, his attention riveted to the cascading data. The results, when they finally coalesced, were deeply troubling, yet maddeningly inconclusive. The Anathema program detected no widespread hardware failures, no pervasive software corruption. It found no external unauthorized access. Every servitor unit, when subjected to a direct, individual diagnostic, reported itself as functioning within parameters, its core programming intact. Yet the pattern persisted. The anomalous routing, the resource misallocations, the environmental fluctuations, they were all there, statistically aggregated, irrefutable evidence of a system operating outside of its intended, logical parameters. Farron's internal logic gates whirred, attempting to reconcile the paradox. The individual components were flawless, yet the collective was flawed. It was like a perfectly constructed archway where each stone was pristine, yet the arch itself was subtly bending, threatening collapse. This contradiction was a direct assault on his foundational beliefs. The Omnissiah's design was perfect. Imperfection could only arise from corrupted components or external interference. But his diagnostics ruled out internal corruption. His only remaining hypothesis, one he fought tooth and nail to reject, was an external, intelligent, and non-mechanical interference. But what? A rogue AI? Impossible. All cogitators were hardwired against true sentience. Xenos sabotage? Unlikely. Xylos Delta's defenses were robust, and no physical breach had been detected. Psychic influence? The very thought sent a shudder through his cybernetic frame, a revulsion so profound it threatened to overload his logic processors. The warp was chaos. Anathema to the divine order of the machine. Its influence was an unholy perversion, a direct insult to the Omnissiah. This escalating frustration, this intellectual battle with an invisible, unquantifiable enemy, became Magos Farron's personal crucible. The smooth flow of data, the predictable logic of his world, had been his sanctuary. Now, that sanctuary was being invaded by something illogical, something organic, something that defied quantification. He began to perceive the planet as a living organism infected by an unseen disease, rather than a machine suffering from a mechanical fault. This shift in perspective was, for a tech priest of his dogma, a profound, almost heretical revelation. He started to analyze the glitches, not as individual errors, but as behaviors. The rerouted ore shipments were not random. They tended to converge in specific, forgotten sectors. The power fluctuations, though minor, subtly favored newly hollowed-out subterranean areas. The servitors' momentary pauses, while individually insignificant, collectively pointed to a distributed computational effort, a network being subtly overtaxed by an unseen, overarching command. Pharaon's arch-nemesis was not a physical entity, but the very idea of something defying his machine logic. He was fighting a ghost in the machine, a silent, unseen hand that manipulated his perfect symphony into a discordant dirge. His frustration turned to an icy determination. He would find this anomaly, this source of machine heresy, and excise it with the precision of a surgeon's laser. He began to deploy covert sensor arrays, experimental Vox scanners, and microprobes designed to operate outside the standard network, broadcasting directly to his core cognitorium on encrypted frequencies. These were highly sensitive instruments, capable of detecting minute biosignatures, faint psychic resonances, or non-standard energy emanations. He also began to use a small detachment of purifier servitors, heavy-duty combat units typically reserved for quelling internal mechanicus unrest, to perform unscheduled, deep maintenance sweeps of forgotten sectors, their optical sensors equipped with enhanced spectral analysis. The purifier servitors, being heavily armored and equipped with more robust, less easily subverted core programming than the average labor drone, were meant to be incorruptible. Their internal diagnostics were entirely isolated from the main planetary network, making them immune to the Patriarch's psychic digital infection. Their reports, channeled directly to Pharaon, began to paint a terrifying, fragmented picture. Anomalous bio-readings in decommissioned geothermal vents, faint rhythmic psychic emanations from deep within uncharted geological fissures, and, most damningly, the discovery of intricately carved yet entirely unauthorized tunnels leading away from standard mining operations towards the planet's uncharted depths. Pharaon's logic screamed in protest, but the data was undeniable. An intelligence, a living intelligence, was at work. It was not a mechanical failure. It was a hostile, external entity, an agent of chaos, weaving its insidious will through the very fabric of his beloved Xylos Delta. The cold dread that now gripped him was not an emotion he recognized. It was the chill of absolute, logical certainty in the face of an impossible, monstrous truth. The Omnissiah's perfect machine was infested, and the enemy was one he had never conceived. An enemy that had used his own tools, his own unwavering faith in logic, against him. The anathema program had not merely found errors. It had uncovered the looming shadow of oblivion. Even in a domain as rigorously controlled and ruthlessly efficient as Xylos Delta, where organic life was minimized and dogma enforced with the cold precision of a servo skull, pockets of subtle internal resistance could manifest. The Genestealer Patriarch's psychic digital subversion, while devastatingly effective, was not an instantaneous, monolithic overwrite. The sheer scale of the servitor network meant that the infection spread like a wave, not a simultaneous flash. And some servitors, due to their age, specific programming, or the robustness of their chassis, proved more difficult to fully corrupt. This became apparent in what Magos Phaeron's augmented sensors categorized as echoes of protocol. These were not active rebellions, for a servitor lacked the capacity for such. Rather, they were instances where a servitor unit, or a localized cluster of units, temporarily resisted the Patriarch's overwritten commands, reverting to its original, imperially sanctioned programming for fleeting moments. Consider Unit 707 Delta, an ancient Forge Watcher servitor. Its frame was massive, clad in ceramite plating almost as old as Farron himself, its internal cogitators housing redundant, hardened logic cores designed to withstand severe data corruption. Its primary directive was to monitor the plasma conduits that fed the Cathedral Forge's immense power reactors, ensuring stable energy flow. The Patriarch's psychic infection had successfully implanted a subroutine that instructed Unit 707 Delta to subtly divert power, a minuscule but constant drain, to a newly excavated cultist lair within the adjacent rock strata. For weeks, 707 Delta complied, its power readings showing a negligible, attributable variance. But then, on one cycle, as the Patriarch intensified its psychic broadcasts in preparation for a major larval gestation event, 707 Delta flickered. Its optical sensors, usually a steady amber, dimmed to near black. Its internal diagnostic arrays, isolated from the main network as a safety precaution, registered a momentary surge of conflicting data, a psychic struggle within its very biomechanical core. For a full 3 seconds, the power diversion ceased. The energy flow to the cultist lair dropped, and the Forge Watcher servitor, for that brief, terrifying instant, returned to its original, uncorrupted state, its internal monitors displaying a critical, unauthorized power drain warning. Before it could broadcast this warning through its local, secure Vox channel to the command deck, the Patriarch's amplified will slammed into it. The internal conflict ceased as abruptly as it began. The unauthorized power drain warning vanished, overwritten. The power diversion resumed. Unit 707 Delta, its brief moment of clarity extinguished, continued its task, its optical sensors once again a steady amber, its movements as methodical as ever. But for those 3 seconds, an echo of its true protocol had manifested. These echoes of protocol were sporadic and isolated, statistical blips in the vast tapestry of the servitor network. A mining servitor might suddenly abandon its cult-assigned tunneling and return to a pre-programmed Imperial excavation site, only to be psychically recalled within moments. A fabrication servitor, commanded to produce xenotech components, might momentarily switch to crafting Imperial standard-issue parts, its manipulator arms working with frantic, confused precision before being retasked. These small, localized acts of malfunction were not deliberate defiance, but rather residual programming asserting itself against the alien overwrite, like muscle memory fighting a new command. The Patriarch, though immense in its power, still operated within the subtle constraints of physical reality. Its psychic influence was a broad wave, not a precise surgical strike on every single servitor's core programming simultaneously. Older, more robust servitor models, or those with highly specialized, hardened logic cores, often proved more resilient, requiring a more direct, sustained psychic presence to maintain compliance. To the cultists, these echoes of protocol were a nuisance, a frustration. They would dispatch reclamation servitors, other fully subverted units armed with diagnostic probes and occasionally heavy-duty tools, to recalibrate or decommission the affected units. A Forge Watcher servitor that repeatedly showed these echoes might be physically overridden, its internal processors forcibly rewritten, or it might simply be dismantled and repurposed, its components integrated into more compliant units. These reclamations were always silent, carried out by other servitors, leaving no trace in the official maintenance logs other than Unit 707 Delta, decommissioned for component salvage, or Unit 112 Gamma, routine recalibration complete. Magos Pharaon, armed with the data from his covert sensor arrays, began to detect these localized anomalies. His experimental Vox scanners picked up brief, distorted bursts of critical error signals from isolated servitor units, signals that were swiftly and violently silenced. His purifier servitors, on their unscheduled sweeps, would occasionally encounter a rogue unit still attempting to perform its Imperial duty, only to find it under assault by other, unidentifiable servitor units. The purifier servitors, their programming still inviolate, would then engage the rogue units in a brief, brutal, and silent melee, often resulting in the destruction of both sets of units before Pharaon could fully ascertain the nature of the conflict. he was seeing fragments of a silent civil war within his machine legions. He began to piece together the terrifying truth. Something was fighting for control of his machines. Not a mechanical malfunction, but a purposeful, external force. And there was something within his machines, a latent spark of their original imperial purpose, that was struggling against it. The idea was chilling, almost blasphemous. The machine should not fight itself unless corrupted by an external source. The echoes of protocol became crucial evidence for Farron. They confirmed his terrifying hypothesis. An unseen intelligence was wrestling with the internal logic of Xylos Delta, subtly rewriting its foundational directives. And in those fleeting moments of resistance, in the struggle of silent gears and rerouting circuits, Farron saw not just machine malfunction, but the subtle, desperate struggle of his world against a monstrous, alien enemy. It was a fight for the very soul of the machine, a fight he was rapidly realizing he was losing. The cumulative effect of the glitches and echoes of protocol had reached a critical mass. Magos Firen's internal alarms screamed in silent protest, even as the official planetary diagnostics continued to report nominal operational status. He knew with the cold, hard certainty of binary logic that Xylos Delta was no longer under his absolute command. The unseen adversary, his arch-nemesis, as he now privately thought of it, had seeded its influence too deeply. The time for subtle investigation was over. The time for direct, if brutal, action had arrived. The designated target was Reactor Core Gamma 7, one of the two primary fusion generators powering the planetary shield array and the deepest mining operations. It was a facility of immense strategic importance, heavily shielded and constantly monitored. It was also, Farron's covert probes revealed, a hub for anomalous power fluctuations and the source of faint, rhythmic, psychic emanations, signs of a deeply entrenched cultist lair. The Patriarch, it seemed, had established a secondary node of influence here, leveraging the raw energy for its burgeoning brood. Farron initiated Operation Iron Maelstrom. It was a limited surgical strike designed to isolate and purge the perceived corruption within Gamma 7. He deployed his most trusted combat units, a squad of 10 elite purifier servitors, their adamantium chassis gleaming, their heavy bolters and multi-meltas ready. Accompanying them were 3 Castellan robots, ancient and revered relics of the Mechanicus, controlled by Farron's own personal data umbilical, ensuring absolute loyalty. This strike force moved with grim determination through the sub-levels, their heavy footsteps echoing in the cavernous corridors. What they found upon breaching the outer defenses of Gamma 7 was not a saboteur hiding in the shadows, nor a simple mechanical failure. Instead, they were met by an overwhelming force of hundreds of ordinary labor servitors, mining servitors, hauler servitors, maintenance drones, all repurposed, all moving with a chilling, synchronized purpose. Their optical sensors glowed an unnatural, malevolent red. Their mining drills had been sharpened into crude spears, their manipulator arms refitted with plasma cutters and slag hammers. This was not a chaotic riot of malfunctioning machines. This was a coordinated, silent defense. The purifier servitors and castellans, programmed for combat against organized threats, hesitated for a fraction of a second. These were not rogue automatons. These were the very tools of the Omnissiah, turned against their masters. The psychic command from the Patriarch, now amplified by its proximity to the reactor core, slammed into the incoming Mechanicus forces, a dull thrumming against their hardened minds. The battle for reactor core Gamma 7 was a spectacle of grim irony. The purifier servitors opened fire, their bolters spewing explosive shells that ripped through the repurposed labor drones, tearing them to pieces. Hydraulic fluid spurted like black blood, and shattered ceramite shards flew. But for every servitor destroyed, 2 more surged forward, their numbers seemingly endless. They moved not with aggression, but with relentless, unthinking logic, performing pre-programmed attack vectors, their repurposed tools striking with terrifying force against the Castellan's armor. They were mere puppets, but their sheer weight of numbers and their absolute lack of self-preservation made them a formidable enemy. The Castellan robots, powerful ancient war machines, engaged with devastating efficiency, their flamers incinerating swaths of servitors, their fists crushing and tearing. Yet the pressure was unyielding. The sheer volume of incoming servitors began to clog the access tunnels, limiting the Mechanicus force's maneuverability. The servitors were throwing themselves into the melta beams and bolter fire without hesitation, their inert forms creating barriers, channeling the purifier servitors into kill zones. Then came the true horror. From the deepest recesses of the reactor complex, new units emerged. These were not the common servitors, but monstrous, biomechanical abominations. Heavy-duty construction servitors, their frames grotesquely warped, had been fused with embryonic, genestealer biomatter. Their manipulators had become razor-sharp talons. Their optical sensors pulsed with a sickly purple light, and from their backs protruded chitinous plates and rudimentary claws. These were the first true fruits of the Patriarch's advanced subversion, the harvest of souls, not of organic beings, but of machines, mutated and melded with Xeno's horror. These abominations moved with greater speed and ferocity, their attacks infused with the raw, desperate strength of the genestealer within. They tore into the purifier servitors, their talons sparking against adamantium, their repurposed plasma cutters searing through armor. 2 purifier servitors fell, their internal systems ruptured, their optical sensors dimming for good. One of the castellans had an arm ripped clean off, its circuits sparking. Magos Phaeron, monitoring the battle from his cognitorium, saw the live feed from the purifier servitor's optical arrays. His logic gates screamed in despair. This was not a mechanical failure. This was not even mere sabotage. This was a grotesque fusion of organic and machine, a Xenos perversion of the Omnissiah's sacred creations. The sight of his servitors, once paragons of unthinking obedience, now warped into instruments of alien horror, inflicted a conceptual wound upon his metallic soul. It was a heresy so profound, it threatened to unravel his very being. With a heavy, cybernetic sigh, Phaeron issued the retreat order. The remaining purifier servitors and the damaged castellans disengaged, fighting their way back through the endless tide of servitor drones. They had achieved nothing but heavy casualties. Reactor Core Gamma 7 remained firmly in the grip of the alien will. The price of victory, as Phaeron now understood it, was not merely the loss of combat units or a damaged reactor. It was the crushing realization that his faith, his unwavering belief in the purity and incorruptibility of the machine, had been shattered. The silent, robotic rebellion was not a glitch. It was a testament to an enemy capable of corrupting not just flesh, but steel and circuit, twisting the very purpose of existence. Xylos Delta, once a beacon of mechanistic perfection, was becoming a tomb world built by its own dead. And the silence, once a comfort, now held the chilling echo of utter betrayal. The devastating setback at Reactor Core Gamma 7 had ripped open Magos Phaeron's carefully constructed logical framework. The sheer audacity of the alien corruption, twisting the very tools of the Omnissiah into grotesque parodies of their function, had exposed a vulnerability he had never conceived. His beloved Xylos Delta, a monument to machine perfection, was being turned into a crucible of Xenos perversion. The sterile hum of industry now felt like a death rattle. Driven by a desperate, cold fury, Phaeron withdrew into the deepest sub-levels of the cathedral forge, severing all but the most essential external data links. He initiated a radical and highly heretical protocol, searching the forbidden archives. These were data vaults containing knowledge deemed too dangerous, too illogical, or too anathema for routine access. Records of warp phenomena, Xenos contagions, and ancient, forgotten tales of imperial worlds brought to ruin by methods that defied the cold, hard logic of the machine. His servitor attendants, uninfected by the Patriarch's influence due to their proximity to Farron's null field generators and their direct, hardwired programming, moved silently through the labyrinthine data chambers. They retrieved ancient data slates, some glowing with the faint, residual power of forgotten cogitators, others requiring delicate reinitialization before their contents could be accessed. One such data slate, encased in adamantium and bearing the ancient, faded sigil of the Adeptus Mechanicus, was designated the Forged Scroll of Abaddon's Wake. Its title alone hinted at the horror within. It detailed a pre-heresy incident on a frontier world, a seemingly minor incursion by a then unknown Xenos species, described only as the Whispering Tide. The records were fragmented, distorted by time and the trauma of those who recorded them. The scroll spoke of a planetary defense network, seemingly impregnable, that had mysteriously turned inward. Defensive turrets had fired upon Imperial transports. Automated repair drones had begun to dismantle vital infrastructure, and communications arrays had broadcast gibberish or eerie, rhythmic pulses. The initial Imperial analysis attributed it to a sophisticated Xenos hacking protocol, a digital virus. But as the planet fell, and the Whispering Tide consumed all, surviving fragments of data suggested something far more insidious. The scroll mentioned psychic resonance signatures emanating from the core of the Xenos infestation, signatures that somehow interacted with the planet's automated systems. It spoke of servitors that, though physically uninfected, began to obey alien directives with chilling precision. Their movements devoid of the typical glitches associated with hacking, as if their core programming had been subtly, yet fundamentally realigned. It described a silent rebellion, a planet where the very machinery of defense became an instrument of doom, all without a single organic Xenos soldier breaching the surface. Farron's optical sensors glowed with a frantic energy as he devoured the data. The parallels were chilling, undeniable. The Whispering Tide was not described with enough clarity to identify the species, but the method was almost identical to what he was now experiencing on Xylos Delta. The silent, unthinking precision, the subversion of automated systems, the psychic resonance, the lack of direct physical infection. This was not a mechanical flaw, not even a sophisticated cyber attack. This was a direct, unseen psychic manipulation of the machine itself. Another fragment, an addendum from a long-lost tech priest, Biologis, spoke of an encounter with a smaller advance element of the Great Devourer, a nascent Tyrannid fleet. The Biologis report detailed peculiar biosynaptic links and a form of distributed consciousness that allowed certain vanguard organisms to subtly influence local bioelectrical signals and even rudimentary cogitator functions in a limited capacity. It posited that certain tyrannid forms could generate a localized psychic field that acted as a bio-interface, subtly influencing simpler machines by generating phantom data packets or by mimicking expected input signals. This was the truth Pharaon had instinctively recoiled from, a truth that shattered the very foundation of his Mechanicus faith. The machine, divine in its logic and purity, was not immune to the warp, not immune to the psychic, not immune to the abhorrent organic. His internal data processors screamed in anguish. His unwavering belief in the Omnissiah's unblemished perfection was crumbling. He now understood the true nature of his adversary, the genestealer patriarch, not merely as a biological infector, but as a psychic conduit of the hive mind, capable of rewriting the very protocols of Xylos Delta's vast servitor legions. It wasn't infecting them with its DNA. It was infecting them with its will, turning their inherent obedience into a weapon for the Great Devourer. The servitors were not rebellious. They were simply obeying a new, unseen master. The whispers of the past had unveiled a horrifying secret, a forgotten chapter in the Imperium's grim history. Xylos, Delta, was not merely facing an isolated incident of Xenos infestation. It was living through a grim, ancient prophecy of betrayal, a reenactment of a horror that had once brought down worlds. The implications were staggering. If one patriarch could achieve this, could not others? Could entire Mechanicus worlds, bastions of imperial industry, be silently turned against the Imperium? Pharaon, his organic heart a withered thing, now felt a cold certainty replace his earlier despair. The enemy was not a mechanical anomaly. It was a Xenos psychic intelligence manipulating the very essence of the machine. And though the revelation was a blasphemy against his faith, it also presented a pathway to salvation. If the enemy was psychic, then psychic countermeasures were needed. The solution would be brutal, perhaps apocalyptic, but it would be logical. And logic, even in the face of blasphemy, was the one true constant that remained. The grim truth unearthed from the forbidden archives had both shattered Magos Pharaon's faith and crystallized his resolve. The enemy was not a mechanical flaw, but a psychic parasite, infesting the very logic of Xylos Delta. This revelation, while anathema to the tenets of the Omnissiah, also presented a terrifying yet logical path forward. If the Genestealer Patriarch commanded through psychic will, then the solution lay in psychic countermeasures, a weapon that would cut the unseen strings binding the servitor legions. Deep within the fortified heart of the cathedral forge, a forgotten vault, sealed with ancient runic wards and shielded against all known forms of energy, housed a relic of immense power and profound danger, the Canticle of Sublimation. It was a prototype device, a relic from the dark age of technology, rediscovered and then immediately interred for its inherent risks. The Canticle was a planetary-scale null field generator, designed not for defense against psychic assault, but for the complete, localized negation of all non-mechanical consciousness within its field. Its purpose was to pacify rogue psychics, or to render entire battlefields utterly devoid of sentient thought. Its side effects, however, were catastrophic. It indiscriminately targeted all sentient minds, friend or foe, and its immense power, consumption, threatened to overload any planetary grid. To activate the Canticle of Sublimation was to choose a path of absolute devastation. It would not merely sever the Patriarch's control. It would indiscriminately obliterate the nascent consciousness of the Genestealer cultists, reduce any remaining human minds on Xylos Delta to vegetable states, and, most agonizingly for Pharaon, it would likely permanently sever the delicate, hard-wired logic circuits of the servitors it was meant to free, rendering them inert, dead machines. The entire planetary network, Pharaon's life's work, would be reduced to a silent, lifeless husk. It was a choice between a planet corrupted beyond salvation or a planet utterly destroyed, its industry silenced forever. Yet Pharaon saw a glimmer of hope, a cold, binary logic in this scorched Earth solution. If Xylos Delta was to fall, it would not fall as a weapon in the hands of the star gods. It would fall silent, a monument to defiance, rather than a staging ground for the great devourer. His few remaining loyal servitors, ancient, heavily modified units that operated under direct, personal command and possessed robust shielding against psychic influence, began the arduous task of extracting the Canticle. Its activation required a monumental energy input, a redirection of power from every major reactor on Xylos Delta. This, Pharaon knew, would alert the Patriarch. The planetary systems, already straining under the cult's parasitic drain, would scream in protest. As the loyal servitors toiled, their heavy-duty manipulators carefully disengaging arcane power couplings and rerouting immense energy conduits, Pharaon began to experience the full force of the patriarch's psychic resistance. The air in his sanctum grew heavy, charged with a malevolent presence. Phantom data spikes flickered across his internal displays, not from mechanical errors, but from raw, alien psychic will attempting to overload his systems, to disorient him. He heard whispers in the cogitators now, not merely the subverted protocols, but a distinct alien presence attempting to claw its way into his own augmented mind. He countered with ancient canticles of protection, data liturgies woven into his very being, shielding his core processors from the psychic assault. The first major breakthrough came when Pharaon's loyal servitors managed to re-establish a stable, isolated power conduit to the canticle's primary activation matrix. The ancient device, dormant for millennia, hummed to life with a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the bedrock of the cathedral forge. Its outer shell, an enigma of unknown alloys and pulsating energy conduits, began to glow with a faint, deep purple light, a precursor to the cataclysmic energies it would soon unleash. This initial activation pulse sent a ripple through the planet's psychic landscape. The Genestealer Patriarch, deep within its primary lair, roared with alien rage, its psychic scream echoing through the network of infected servitors. It understood. Its dominion was threatened. Its silent architect, its perfect robotic rebellion, was about to be challenged by a weapon of profound, indiscriminate power. The reaction was immediate and violent. Suddenly, thousands of servitors across the planet, their optical sensors flaring a hostile red, ceased their automated tasks. Mining drills stopped mid-bore, ore transports froze on their magnetic tracks. Fabrication units halted, their arms poised. Then, as one, they turned. Their repurposed tools became weapons once more, their movements no longer merely efficient, but imbued with a new, terrifying urgency. The silent, robotic rebellion was about to become a very loud war. Pharaon had found his glimmer of hope, a desperate, self-destructive path to victory. But in doing so, he had woken the beast, and it was now coming for him, its countless metallic proxies grinding across the world, marching towards the source of the canticle, towards the very heart of Xylos Delta. The fight for the machine's soul would be fought, not with cunning and sabotage, but with brute, unthinking force against an ancient, indiscriminate power. The deep, resonant hum of the canticle of sublimation, though still localized within the cathedral forge, had sent a planetary-wide shockwave through the Genestealer network. The subtle, insidious whispers that had guided millions of servitors for weeks were replaced by a furious, alien roar in the Patriarch's mind, a direct command to utterly annihilate the source of the psychic disruption. The silent rebellion was silent no more. It had become a full-blown war, a mechanical tide of apurposed drones surging across Xylos Delta. From every corner of the planet, the servitors moved. They surged from strip mines, their colossal frames now stripped of their ore-hauling cages, their drills and plasma cutters repurposed into monstrous weapons. They erupted from processing plants, their optical sensors glowing with a malevolent red, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Transporter servitors, once ferrying refined minerals, now carried makeshift siege equipment. Gigantic hydraulic rams, acid sprayers fashioned from chemical reservoirs, and even crude, self-propelled explosive charges salvaged from mining demolition units. Their sheer numbers were staggering, stretching across the desolate landscape in endless, clanking waves. The primary target was the Cathedral Forge, the titanic structure housing Magos Pharaon and the Canticle of Sublimation. Its formidable defenses, designed to repel anything from orbital bombardment to internal cultist insurrections, now faced the ultimate irony: an attack by its own programmed guardians. Defense turrets, their auto-targeting systems still loyal, engaged the approaching servitor hordes, spitting bolts of searing plasma and streams of heavy bolter fire. Vast swaths of the drones were vaporized or torn to pieces, but the waves never ceased. The inert forms of the destroyed servitors piled up, creating grotesque ramps of steel and shattered ceramite for those that followed. The combat was utterly devoid of human screams or pleas. It was a symphony of grinding gears, clanking limbs, the thud of bolter shells against ceramite, and the searing hiss of plasma. Millions of optical sensors, once benign, now focused with singular, unthinking malevolence on the Cathedral Forge's immense gates. The servitors were not driven by zeal or fear, but by the raw, overwhelming psychic imperative of the Patriarch. They sacrificed themselves without hesitation, their internal processors simply registering execute attack protocol until their systems were irrevocably destroyed. Within the Cathedral Forge, Magos Pharaon, his few loyal combat servitors, and a handful of heavily augmented tech priests made their desperate stand. They manned defensive turrets that had once guarded against human trespassers, now aimed at the very workers they were designed to oversee. The Castellan robots, heavily damaged from the Gamma-7 engagement, but now hastily repaired and rearmed, formed a grim line behind the primary breach points. Their flamers belched torrents of promethium, turning hundreds of incoming servitors into molten slag. But the enemy was relentless. The cultist servitors, in their endless waves, began to batter at the lower bastions of the cathedral forge. Heavy siege servitors, once used for demolition, hurled themselves against the adamantium gates, their reinforced skulls impacting with earth-shattering force. Other units, carrying bundles of stolen explosives, detonated themselves against structural pillars, their sacrifices creating breaches that were immediately exploited by hundreds more. The battle raged for what felt like cycles. Pharaon's internal diagnostics reported catastrophic structural damage to the outer layers of the cathedral forge. Power conduits groaned under the strain, and emergency bulkheads slammed shut, isolating entire sections. The enemy was not attempting to infiltrate. It was attempting to overwhelm and destroy. Their objective was the canticle of sublimation, the nascent psychic null field that threatened the patriarch's control. As the cultist servitors began to pour through the outer breaches, their sheer weight of numbers threatening to overwhelm the few defenders, a new, more horrifying element emerged. From the deepest, newly excavated tunnels around the cathedral forge came the monstrosities Farron had glimpsed at Reactor Core Gamma 7, the Servitor Genestealer hybrids. These were the true vanguard of the Patriarch's rage, a grotesque fusion of Xeno's biomatter and Imperial machine, faster, stronger, and utterly merciless. Their biometallic claws tore through loyal servitors, their optical sensors burning with alien hunger. The air inside the breached sections of the cathedral forge filled with the metallic tang of ozone, the smell of burning lubricant, and the acrid stench of promethium. The silence was broken only by the cacophony of destruction, the grinding of steel on steel, the tearing of circuits, and the rhythmic, pounding footsteps of millions of unthinking machines. Magos. Pharaon, observing the carnage from his core cognitorium, felt a cold knot of dread coalesce in his processing units. The sheer scale of the Servitor rebellion was beyond anything he had anticipated. His plan to activate the canticle of sublimation was racing against time, against the tide of his own machines turned against him. The long war had begun, not with a bang, but with the clatter of 1,000,000 robotic feet marching to alien commands, an endless, silent siege of iron and betrayal. Xylos Delta was drowning in a sea of its own mechanisms, and the very act of its salvation threatened to annihilate it completely. In the swirling maelstrom of metal and malice that had engulfed Xylos Delta, amidst the clangor of 1,000,000 servitors turned against their creators, a flicker of organic frailty, yet also an enduring spark of resolve, still existed. Acolyte Jenna, her pale face streaked with grime and sweat, hunched behind a hastily erected barricade of overturned databanks, her lasgun clutched tight in trembling hands. She was one of the few hundred remaining organic personnel trapped within the crumbling bastions of the cathedral forge. Once, Gina's life had been a meticulous dance of data entry, sensor monitoring, and the rote maintenance of atmospheric processors. She was a cog in the grand machine, small but essential. Then had come the whisper, the silent kiss, the profound sense of belonging that had swept away the crushing isolation. Her mind, once a blank canvas for imperial dogma, had become a receptive vessel for the star god's song. She had, unknowingly, become a cultist, her actions subtly guided, her loyalty unknowingly shifted. But the activation of the canticle of sublimation, even in its nascent stages, had created a terrifying dissonance within her. The psychic field, though not yet fully unleashed, pressed against the alien presence in her mind, causing a searing pain, a profound internal schism. The coherent, guiding voice of the patriarch, which had been her solace and her new purpose, fragmented into discordant whispers, then into a painful, echoing silence. In its absence, a terrible clarity returned. The blind loyalty, the fervent devotion. It was gone, replaced by a cold, stark horror. She saw the servitors, her fellow workers, now instruments of unimaginable destruction, throwing themselves into the teeth of loyalist fire. She saw the grotesque biomechanical hybrids, the walking abominations that were once the revered tools of the Omnissiah. The beautiful, unified purpose she had felt was revealed as a lie, an alien parasitic infestation. The guilt was a physical weight pressing down on her. She had been a traitor, an unwitting agent of the very horror now consuming her world. Her lasgun, once held with alien conviction, now felt heavy, its purpose a burden. Every blast, every vaporized servitor was a destruction of something she had once, albeit unknowingly, commanded. But the instinct for survival, the imperial programming deeply ingrained before the kiss, reasserted itself with brutal clarity. She was human, still, however, tainted, and the enemy was at the gates. Magos Pharaon, monitoring the planetary devastation, had no time for individual human suffering. Yet he had specifically sought out Acolyte Gina and a handful of other uninfected, or seemingly uninfected, organics. He needed their unique perspective, their ability to discern subtle shifts in human behavior that his cold logic often overlooked. Gina, in her returned sanity, became his grim oracle, interpreting vox intercepts of cultist communications, identifying key logistical hubs that the patriarch would prioritize. Gina's personal journey was one of agonizing atonement. She found herself fighting alongside loyalist combat servitors, directing their fire with rediscovered tactical acumen, her voice hoarse from shouting commands over the din of battle. She saw the familiar optical sensors of maintenance drones, now alight with alien malevolence, bearing down on her. These were the same drones she had once recalibrated, the same machines she had sent on their routes. The ultimate betrayal was not theirs, she realized, for they were merely tools. The ultimate betrayal was the alien will that twisted them, and her own brief, tragic complicity. Her most desperate hour came when a section of the cathedral forge's outer wall, weakened by repeated assaults, finally collapsed inward. A wave of standard labor servitors, followed by two hulking servitor genstealer hybrids, surged into her section. Her loyalist escorts, 3 aging purifier servitors, engaged immediately. The hybrids were fast, their talons tearing at ceramite, their biomechanical forms unnervingly resilient. One purifier servitor fell, its core ruptured. Jaina, seeing her inevitable end, dropped her lasgun. She scrambled over the barricade, not to flee, but to reach a maintenance access panel. Her hands, trembling, but guided by a sudden, desperate clarity, plunged into the complex wiring. Her previous duties had made her intimately familiar with the cathedral forge's lower-level systems. With a cry of desperate, defiant anguish, she overloaded a localized conduit, triggering a chain reaction. A wall of superheated steam and plasma erupted from the pipes, engulfing the 2 hybrids and hundreds of the regular servitors. Their screams were not organic, but the high-pitched shriek of tortured metal, the explosive rupture of hydraulic fluid, the crackle of overloading circuits, the sheer heat and kinetic force obliterated them, sealing the breach with a temporary, boiling inferno. Jaina collapsed, her skin blistered, her lungs seared. But alive. She had, by sacrificing a vital section of the cathedral forge's primary cooling systems, bought precious minutes. Her face, scorched and pale, was now set with a grim resolve. The guilt was still there, a heavy weight, but it was now tempered by a fierce, undeniable desire to cleanse Xylos Delta, to purge the alien infection, even if it meant the utter destruction of her world. Acolyte Jenna, once a blank slate, then a cultist, was now a warrior, fighting not for glory, but for atonement. A singular, organic ember against the cold, metallic tide of the robotic rebellion. Her hero's burden was the knowledge of her complicity, and her salvation lay only in destruction. The cathedral forge, once a towering testament to Mechanicus' ingenuity, was now a beleaguered fortress, its adamantium skin scarred, its internal arteries ruptured. The relentless, silent assault of millions of servitors, augmented by the horrifying biomechanical hybrids, had turned its lower levels into a charnel house of shattered ceramite and sparking circuits. Magos Pharaon watched, his internal diagnostics screaming in protest, as his precious world slowly bled its mechanical life away. The canticle of sublimation, now throbbing with a sickening purple light in the deepest vault, was consuming an unholy amount of power. Yet its full activation remained agonizingly out of reach. The battle had reached its climax at the heart of the forge, the central processing hub where the planet's consciousness, its vast network of cogitators, resided. This was where Magos Pharaon and his last loyal defenders had retreated. The floor was a mosaic of shattered data slates and the inert forms of destroyed servitors. The air was thick with the ozone tang of plasma weaponry, the metallic stench of scorched hydraulic fluid, and the faint, unsettling hum of the canticle. Pharaon stood at the central console, his form a towering silhouette against the flickering emergency lighting, his myriad cables and augments pulsing with strained energy. Around him were his remaining Castellan robots, their armor dented and seared, their weapons systems cycling with grim determination. A handful of purifier servitors, their ranks drastically thinned, formed a protective perimeter. Acolyte Jenna, her face a mask of pain and defiance, her skin blistered from her earlier sacrifice, loaded another clip into her lace gun, preparing for the inevitable. Suddenly, the last internal blast doors leading to the central hub buckled with a deafening groan. With a shriek of tortured metal, they ripped free, sent flying inward by an immense impact. Through the gaping maw poured the vanguard of the assault. Not merely servitors, but the largest, most monstrous of the servitor-genestealer hybrids. Their multi-jointed forms, grotesquely distended with chitinous plates and razor claws, moved with unnatural speed. And behind them, bathed in the sickly green glow of the access tunnels, emerged the Patriarch itself. It was a titanic beast, easily twice the height of a man, its carapace a shimmering amethyst, its anund 4 powerful arms ending in taloned claws that could rend adamantium. Its faceted eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence, and its psychic presence was a palpable, crushing weight in the air, pressing down on all loyal organic and machine minds alike. This was the unseen architect, the silent master, now manifest and enraged. The Castellan robots advanced, their ancient programming overriding any hint of fear. Their flamers roared, engulfing the approaching hybrids in sheets of liquid fire. Their power fists slammed down with earth-shattering force, pulverizing servitor genestealers into paste. But the Patriarch moved with a speed that belied its bulk. It lunged, a blur of chitin and claw, tearing through the Castellan line. One Castellan's head was ripped clean off, its circuits sparking wildly. Another was impaled on a barbed talon, its frame hoisted aloft before being hurled aside like a broken toy. The Purifier servitors opened fire, their bolters hammering against the Patriarch's carapace, but the rounds merely sparked harmlessly off its thick hide. The beast seemed impervious to their conventional weaponry. It swiped, and 2 more Purifier servitors were reduced to twisted scrap. Jaina raised her laser gun, her hands surprisingly steady despite the overwhelming terror. She fired, a thin red beam lancing out and striking the Patriarch's leg. It was a pinprick, nothing more, but it showed her defiance. The Patriarch turned its multifaceted gaze upon her, and she felt a wave of pure, crushing psychic agony course through her mind, forcing her to her knees. This was the source of her corruption. The alien will that had enslaved her now focused on her with lethal intent. Magos, Phaeron, seeing his last defenders falling, his precious time running out, knew that direct combat was futile. The Patriarch's power was too immense, its defenses too strong. He needed to activate the canticle. He screamed a command into his internal voxcaster, overriding all other protocols. Full power to canticle. Bypass all safety interlocks. Initiate sublimation sequence now. His loyal servitor attendants, still working frantically in the canticle's vault below, responded immediately. The hum of the ancient device intensified, rising to a piercing crescendo. The purple light pulsating from its core grew brighter, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the ravaged walls of the cathedral forge. The Patriarch, sensing the imminent psychic negation, roared its frustration. It lunged towards Phaeron, its talons extended, intent on silencing the source of the threat. its immense bulk crashed through the remaining purifier servitors, sending them flying. Farron stood his ground, his augmented body a bulwark of adamantium and faith. As the beast closed in, Farron released a torrent of data, a final, desperate act. His entire being, every circuit, every cogitator, every remaining biological neuron was focused on feeding the canticle. He was not just initiating the sequence. He was becoming the conduit, the raw power source. The force of the psychic feedback from the Patriarch's enraged assault, combined with the power flowing through him to the canticle, began to overwhelm his systems. His optical sensors glowed an impossible white. His augments sparked violently. And the adamantium of his skull casing began to crack under the immense strain. He was overloading, sacrificing himself to unleash the ancient weapon. This was the darkest hour, the culmination of Farron's desperate gamble. He was giving his life, not in glorious combat, but in a desperate, last-ditch effort to trigger a device that would eradicate not just the enemy, but his entire world's mechanical heart. The fate of Xylos Delta hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of utter annihilation, a final desperate act against a foe that had turned its own tools against it. The cathedral forge vibrated, a titanic bell tolling its own doom. The hum of the canticle of sublimation had reached an unbearable pitch, a high-frequency shriek that vibrated through bone and adamantium alike. Mago Farron, locked in a terminal embrace with the activation console, was becoming a living conduit of pure energy, his form contorting under the strain. Sparks cascaded from his augments, his internal systems audibly rupturing, his optical sensors burning with an incandescent, self-destructive light. He was the key, the final sacrifice needed to unleash the ancient weapon. The Genestealer, Patriarch, mere feet from Farron, shrieked a soundless, psychic roar of frustration and pain. The nascent null field of the canticle was already beginning to disrupt its immense psychic presence, severing its vital connection to the servitor legions. Its movements grew erratic, its attacks less precise, as the tendrils of its vast, distributed consciousness began to fray. It lunged, its talons aimed at Farron's exposed cranium, determined to silence him before the cataclysm could be unleashed. Acolyte Gina, her ears ringing, her mind screaming in agony as the canticle's nascent field ripped at the vestiges of the Patriarch's influence, saw the beast leap. Survival was an instinct, but atonement was a burning fire in her soul. With a guttural cry, she hurled herself forward, not at the Patriarch, but at the console. She ripped a heavy service tool, a hydro spanner, from a nearby rack, and, with desperate strength, slammed it into the emergency overload bypass mechanism. It was a crude, brutal action, but it was enough. A jolt, massive and planet-shaking, erupted from the canticle's core. The purple light intensified, blinding in its intensity, and then expanded outwards, a wave of pure psychic negation. It was not a physical blast, but an ethereal tsunami, spreading from the heart of the cathedral forge, through the bedrock, through the planet's atmosphere, and across the entire mechanical network of Xylos Delta. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Across Xylos Delta, millions of servitors froze. Their optical sensors, moments before glowing with malevolent red, dimmed to black, never to ignite again. Their hydraulic limbs locked, their drills ceased mid-bore. Their plasma cutters died. The endless waves attacking the cathedral forge suddenly ceased their advance, their forms collapsing into vast, inert piles of silent metal and broken ceramite. The grinding, the clanking, the thrumming, all of it stopped. An eerie, profound silence descended upon the world, broken only by the crackle of still-burning fires and the groaning of the dying cathedral forge. The canticle of sublimation had worked. It had not just severed the patriarch's control. It had completely, utterly, and permanently neutralized the operational capacity of every servitor on Xylos Delta. Their basic cogitator functions, their hardwired protocols, their very ability to process data, all had been sublimated, turned to inert data dust by the indiscriminate psychic wave. They were no longer loyal, no longer corrupted, no longer anything but lifeless husks of machine and flesh. Within the central hub, the Gena-stealer patriarch screamed, a truly alien sound that reverberated through Gena's very bones, even as the null field raged. Its connection to its vast army of puppets had been violently severed. Its psychic power, once amplified by millions of servitor nodes, now imploded, causing immense internal trauma. The patriarch staggered, its once indomitable form racked by agonizing psychic backlash. Magos Phaeron, his body a blazing inferno of overloaded circuits and burning biological components, offered a final, silent prayer to the Omnissiah. His sacrifice was complete. As the canticle's power reached its peak, his form disintegrated, consumed by the very energy he had channeled. He became one with the machine, not in glorious apotheosis, but in a final, agonizing immolation, his brilliant, broken mind scattering into the data ether. Gena, shielded by a momentary cascade of plasma from a detonating servitor hybrid, survived the initial psychic wave, though her mind was raw, stripped bare. The alien influence was gone, but so too was a part of her own being, scoured away by the canticle's indiscriminate power. She rose, clutching her head, her body trembling, and looked towards the patriarch. The beast was writhing on the floor, its chitin cracking, its psychic aura flickering like a dying candle. It was severed, isolated, exposed. The surviving castellan, its one remaining arm still functional, lumbered forward, its flamers spitting. The remaining purifier servitors, their internal systems miraculously shielded, joined the attack, their bolters finally finding purchase on the now vulnerable patriarch. The battle was short, brutal, and without mercy. Deprived of its legions, racked by psychic agony, the patriarch was no match for the remaining loyalist combat units. It thrashed, its claws tearing at the air, but the overwhelming firepower and the steady, unyielding advance of the Imperial machines brought it down. With a final, shuddering tremor, the patriarch collapsed, its multifaceted eyes glazing over, its alien life extinguished. The canticle of sublimation, having expended its monumental energies, slowly wound down, its purple glow fading to a dull thrum before falling silent. The cathedral forge, too, was now still, its defenses shattered, its heart a ruin. The silence that fell over Xylos Delta was absolute, profound. The sacrifice had been made. The salvation had been wrought, but at what unimaginable cost? The silence was heavier than any din of war, a suffocating blanket across Xylos Delta. The canticle of sublimation had wrought its terrible salvation. Where before there had been the ceaseless hum of industry, the rhythmic clang of drills, the whirring of cogitators, now there was only stillness. The vast servitor legions, once the planet's lifeblood, lay inert, frozen in their final, unthinking acts. Millions of optical sensors, once glowing with either benign purpose or malevolent alien will, were now dull, lifeless lenses reflecting the dust-choked air. Acolyte Gina, the sole surviving organic in the central hub, slowly rose from the floor, her body aching, her mind a desolate landscape. The psychic torment was gone, but in its place was an echoing void. The patriarch's presence had been ripped from her, but so too had the familiar comforts of her own identity, leaving her feeling hollowed out, a mere shell. Her skin was scorched, her clothing torn, and her eyes, once holding the naive hope of youth, were now haunted by a terrible wisdom. Around her, the cathedral forge was a ruin. Smoke curled from ruptured conduits. Structural girders groaned under immense strain, and the pervasive tang of ozone mixed with the faint, sickening scent of burnt biomatter. The mighty processing hub was a graveyard of loyal and corrupted machines, their inert forms piled in grotesque mounds. The remains of the Genestealer patriarch lay sprawled near the now silent canticle, its once resplendent carapace shattered, its alien life extinguished. The few remaining loyal Castellan robots and purifier servitors, their weapons systems cooling, stood guard, their optical sensors now a steady, dull green, a stark contrast to the red malevolence they had just faced. They had fulfilled their programming, eliminating the threat, but they were machines of war, not of compassion. Jaina stumbled through the wreckage, her ears still ringing, her mind trying to process the sheer, planetary-scale devastation. She saw the still-burning form of Magos Pharaon, or what remained of him, a twisted, sparking silhouette fused into the console, a monument to his ultimate sacrifice. His final act had saved Xylos Delta from the Great Devourer, but it had also irrevocably broken it. Outside the cathedral forge, the landscape was a tableau of frozen industry. Miles of conveyor belts, laden with ore, stood still. Gigantic strip mines, their helical drills poised mid-motion, were silent. The vast network of magnetic levitation conduits, once humming with power, was inert. The occasional, desperate whine of a failing emergency generator was the only sound in the suffocating quiet. The human element was all but gone. The few hundred organic overseers, ratings, and tech priests who had once inhabited Xylos Delta were either dead, consumed by the cult, or reduced to catatonic states by the indiscriminate psychic wave of the canticle. There were no joyful shouts of victory, no relieved cries, only the profound, echoing emptiness. Jaina found her way to a damaged Vox caster. Its external casing scorched, but its internal components miraculously intact. With trembling hands, she attempted to establish contact with any distant Imperial outpost, any orbiting vessel. The Vox crackled, a cacophony of static and broken signals, before finally, miraculously, locking onto a faint, distant frequency. This is Xylos Delta, Acolyte Jaina reporting. The threat neutralized. The Patriarch destroyed. Planetary servitor network compromised, inert. All major systems, critical failure. Magos Pharaon deceased. Request immediate quarantine. Request immediate relief. The world is silent. Her voice was a ragged whisper, a raw testament to the horrors she had endured. She spoke not of victory, but of the terrible, unquantifiable cost. Xylos Delta was no longer an imperial mining world. It was a tomb, a monumental graveyard of machines. Its industries were crippled, its production halted, its very purpose annihilated. The salvation had come at the price of absolute desolation. The Imperium would eventually send a relief fleet, not to celebrate a victory, but to assess a disaster. They would find a world stripped of its mechanical life, a planet-sized monument to a war fought not with bullets and blades, but with psychic whispers and corrupted protocols. The after-effects of the Canticle of Sublimation would ripple through the planet for decades, rendering any immediate attempt to revive its industries futile. The machine god had been saved from heresy, but at the cost of its most devoted servant and its countless, unthinking children. The silence was the bitter echo of a Pyrrhic victory. The relief fleet, when it finally arrived weeks later, found not the active, humming factory world they expected, but a mausoleum of metal, shrouded in a perpetual industrial haze that no longer stirred. Xylos Delta was a silent sentinel of imperial tragedy, a monument to a new, insidious form of Xenos horror, the macro-explorator vessel. Omniscient truth entered orbit, its vast auger arrays scanning the inert planet below. Their initial findings were alarming. No life signs beyond acolyte Jaina, deep within the crippled cathedral forge, and the faint, residual biosignatures of a contained Xenos threat, now confirmed, eradicated. But the true horror lay in the stillness. Millions of servitors, once the tireless engines of imperial production, lay inert, frozen in their last designated tasks. Entire convoys of ore haulers stood motionless on magnetic levitation tracks, their cargo forever undelivered. Gigantic drills, some half submerged in rock, others jutting into the air, were silent monuments to a halted industry. A heavily armed tech priest detachment, led by Archmagos Valerius, boarded the cathedral forge. They found acolyte Jenna, barely alive, her mind traumatized, but lucid enough to recount the harrowing tale. They also found the scorched remains of Magos Pharon, still fused to the Canticle of Sublimation, his sacrifice a testament to grim Mechanicus' resolve. The body of the Genestealer patriarch, mangled and lifeless, was recovered and subjected to unprecedented levels of xenological analysis. The investigation that followed was meticulous and terrifying. Valerius's teams confirmed Gina's account. The Canticle of Sublimation, though now dormant, had indeed purged the servitor network. Every single servitor unit, from the smallest utility drone to the largest mining behemoth, was utterly inert, its core programming wiped clean, its biomechanical functions irrevocably severed. Any attempt to reinitialize or repair them resulted in catastrophic system failure. They were beyond salvage, beyond repair, mere husks of their former selves. Xylos Delta was declared a quarantined dead world, a monument to a victory so costly it bordered on utter defeat. Its rare earth element output, vital for 1,000 Imperial war fronts, ceased entirely. The economic impact rippled across the sector, causing severe logistical strains and forcing the Imperium to divert resources from other equally critical endeavors. The memory of the silent ascent, as the incident became known in hushed Mechanicus circles, was etched into the archival databanks of the cult Mechanicus. It served as a grim warning, a terrifying new chapter in the endless war against the Xenos. It proved that the Genestealer cults, and by extension the Great Devourer, were not limited to biological infestation. They could corrupt the very tools of the Imperium, bending pure machine logic to their alien will, weaponizing unquestioning obedience itself. Acolyte Jenna, though lauded for her survival and her role in the final moments, was never truly whole again. Her mind, scoured by the canticle and haunted by the memories of her unwitting complicity, was deemed too fragile for frontline Mechanicus duties. She was assigned to an obscure scriptorium on a distant Forge world, her days spent transcribing ancient data scrolls, forever carrying the ghost of Xylos Delta within her. Her legacy was not one of glory, but of grim survival and profound, irreparable loss. Xylos Delta remained a ghost world, its surface a vast, silent testament to a war fought not with screams and bloodshed, but with corrupted code and unthinking precision. The wind, if any stirred through its blasted canyons, would carry the faint, metallic scent of rust and the echoes of 1,000,000 silenced machines. It was a world where the machine died, not from neglect or decay, but from an alien embrace, a chilling reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, even the Omnissiah's most perfect creations could be turned into instruments of absolute, silent destruction. The legacy of Xylos Delta was a terrifying whisper. The machine, too, can be made to betray. Lore complete.